Hi there, and welcome to Our Weekly Craft, a source for ideas, inspiration, and fun for crafters. I'm Sarah White, Chief Maker at ourdailycraft.com, and today I want to talk about labels. It seems like we as makers put a lot of labels on ourselves and on the things that we make that sort of distinguish different things from other things. So, like art versus craft versus fashion versus making, tinkering. There's a whole host of labels that we put on ourselves, that we put on our stuff, that other people put on what we do. And while I was on vacation a couple weeks ago, I was thinking about all of that and how that can be harmful, how that can be helpful if it's helpful. And just wondering why we have these things. So I didn't bring anything for show and tell this week. I'm actually wearing a store-bought sweater, which is not normal, but I'm a little cool this morning for reasons I'm not sure of. But I did bring a notebook. When I'm on vacation, I often morning pages becomes like all day pages, and so I was writing on these ideas, and I just wanted to I was like, oh, that's some pretty smart stuff, and I wanted to make sure that I was talking about the things that I was thinking about, and to just kind of share that with you. So if I'm looking down a little bit more than normal today, that's just because I am reading. So I was saying that I need to explore different crafts in my own different craft in the sense of genres of making, and is something art instead of craft because it has a deeper meaning than just the thing. So like a knit sock is just a knit sock, it's not art. But the knit plastic dress that I made, I'll link in the show notes about that if you don't know what I'm talking about. A couple years, well, it's early 2020, I made a plastic yarn dress that I knit out of shopping bags, and it was in an exhibit at the local theater. So that is art because there was more meaning to it because it was on display as art, right? But then the rest of my knitting is not considered art. How does that, where's the line? And so I said, I want to explore ideas of what is art, what is craft, what is fashion, how do they all come together? Why is that important, and why are they ever separate? How can I make my craft feel like art to me? How do I treat it like art? Why is there a difference? It feels like art is more precious somehow, like it does have a meaning outside of the thing itself. A knit sock is just a sock. It isn't art, but at the time, dedication, skill, self-expression in the sock is the same as in a painting or a poem, right? Just because the sock doesn't mean anything doesn't make it any less precious or important or valuable. And I don't know the answers to all that. How does one treat their craft like art? Is it in how you talk about it, the way you share it, the attitude you bring to making it? Is it more about discovery, less about the repetitive work of making? Finding a way to be curious about it, even when it's something you've done 100 times, 1,000,000 times. How do you come to knitting or crochet or cross stitch or anything with a beginner's mind when you aren't a beginner? How is it doing the same thing over and over again, following your whimsy? We'll get to following your whimsy some other day, but that was the thing I was kind of obsessed with on vacation was, instead of follow your bliss, you should follow your whimsy. It's a whole thing. We'll get to that later. How do you make it new? Does it even need to be or feel new? Every painting is a new thing, just like every cross-stitch pattern is a new thing. Does it have to feel like a challenge? A novelist feels the challenge in every new work. Should I feel the same when I write a blog post or a video? I don't think so, but there is something to be said for not playing things safe. And I don't know what element of danger or suspense is to be found in knitting your 30th sweater. And maybe that's the difference between art and craft to me. A new canvas builds on all your previous experience of painting, just like a new sweater does. But in a way, there's not really a feeling of starting from scratch like there is when you sit down to write a poem The new thing is the same, yes, but it's also fundamentally different in a way that feels like it requires more creative effort than just knitting a hat. Every hat is much like every other hat you've ever knit because you're using the same stitches, and in the end it will hopefully fit a head of some sort. When you just sit down to write a story, it won't be, shouldn't be, like the ones you've done before, and there's a real possibility of failure every time. You have the skills built up, but there's always the possibility that it won't work right this time. So does that make baking an art? Because, it doesn't always work out, right? So maybe it's that possibility that you'll spend all that time and effort on something unsuccessful that makes art different from the skill of knitting or crochet or sewing. And there's another word, skill. Like, is it an art? Is it a craft? Is it a skill? Which isn't to say you can't have a failed sewing project, because I definitely have. But a dress I make doesn't feel like art or fashion because I was just following directions. Did it feel like art to the designer? Does it feel like art to me when I design? Maybe sometimes. I think it feels more like a sense of satisfaction at my cleverness or competency, that I can imagine a thing and it turned out right. Maybe there's something to the idea that if it can be easily replicated in the same way by someone with sufficient skill, that's a craft. So paint by number is a craft, woodworking is a craft, but a sculptor can make a similar sculpture. A painter can use another artist's style. Does that make it a craft? Is it the emotion behind it, the desire to create something unique rather than a copycat or something inspired by someone else? So I guess then the question for me is, how do you keep that attitude of whimsy, discovery, trying to create something new and unique when you are just knitting a pair of socks or crocheting a sweater or whatever becomes like a basic thing you can almost do on autopilot for whatever you're creating is? Is it color choice and stitch pattern that make them novel? Or is it okay to make something that you feel like is just craft, where it feels like you're just cranking it out and you're not like putting creativity into it? Does that still count as being creative? You're literally creating something, from yarn, something that didn't exist before. So in that case, it's literally creative, but is it creative in the sense of using some particular skill within yourself to make something new? Does it even matter? Like, sometimes it is okay to just make a pair of socks, right? It doesn't have to be this big thing. But the whole point of all of this is that I wonder, like, does it matter? Do we bring a different attitude to something when we call it craft versus when we call it art? And is it like a preciousness that's maybe not even a positive thing, that like we get in our heads too much about it if we consider knitting a hat to be an art? Or, how does that affect what we make and how we make it, and the attitude and the energy that we bring to it, and how we talk about it to other people, and how we share it online or whatever? Is there a difference intellectually, in our own minds between art and craft, and how does that affect what we're making? So I don't know the answers to any of this. If there are distinctions, and the labels definitely are not the point. If you like what you're doing, if you're making makes you happy, then it doesn't matter what you call it or what other people call it. And that's a whole nother discussion of like what is called art versus craft out in the world and in the marketplace. If you're trying to sell the things you make, things that are considered art tends to be, more expensive. They're often one of a kind. Not to say that if you're, crocheting amigurumi or whatever, that they aren't in their way, even though you've made, 20 pumpkins. They're all unique in their way, but it feels less precious. It feels more like a commodity, like not as special, and therefore, and people assume that it doesn't take as much time. And in the case of like a pumpkin, maybe it doesn't take as much time, but then it's worth less because it doesn't take as much time or as much skill. And that's a whole other discussion for another day. right now I'm kind of thinking about like in yourself as you're making and as you're talking about what you're making and thinking about what you're making. Does it matter if you call it art or craft or fashion or whatever, making, tinkering, and that there are all sorts of reasons, that creativity and making, whether you consider it creative or not, are, their own reward and their, stress relief and self-expression, increasing confidence in your skills, which can increase your confidence in other parts of your life. Um, all of those things have value regardless of what you call it, how you think about it, how it's received in the world, all of that stuff. And it's really more important, the physical act of the making is more important than all that other stuff of what you label it or what other people label it or how you talk about it or, what you happen to make, even the actual what you're making or if it's any good, whatever good means to you. So, none of that is an answer, but maybe there's a challenge in there of considering how you talk about what you make. Do you call it an art? Do you call it a craft? Do you not call it anything? Do you call it literally what it is, like I'm knitting right now, or I'm making a painting, or whatever? And maybe there's some room for playfulness in there, because like, what if this weekend while you're doing your making, you do consider it an art? Do you approach it differently if it's, I am artfully making this cowl. I'm knitting a cowl right now, that's why I bring that up. But, I am artfully making this skirt or this cross stitch or whatever it is. I am treating it like art. What does it even mean to treat your making like art? How do you approach it differently with a different energy you're feeling or enthusiasm, or does it feel like pressure if you call it art or whatever? I don't know. I would love if you experiment with that. I would love to hear about it, because I don't really know the answer either. I don't know if I have gone into a making session, and because usually I'm just like knitting in front of the TV or whatever, and that doesn't feel like art, right? Art is like this set apart thing where you have to be in your space and doing, and you're alone and it's like a ritual and all of that. And, so maybe I do put too much, like using the word art puts too much pressure on the whole like scene being a thing, whereas I'm just on the couch with my knitting. That's not art, right? So anyway, maybe I will try it too, and I'll report back next week. But I would love to hear if you give that a try, what your feelings are, and in general, do you consider what you do, whatever making you're doing, as art, as craft, as fashion, as creative, all of that? I would love to know, because that's like, I'm really geeky about that kind of stuff, and I think that it's cool. And even though the labels are dumb, like it's all good, it doesn't matter what you call it. But I'm really interested in that and how the labels affect what you make and how you make it. So anyway, yeah, I am reading. Let's see, I just finished Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. She wrote Station 11 and the Glass Castle, and actually one of the characters in Sea of Tranquility is from the Glass Castle. But it is a really short, quick read, science fiction. There are a bunch of connected plot, and characters through time, but ultimately it's about the Time Bureau in the far-off future. And they're investigating this anomaly that has happened through time, that they theorize is proof that we're living in a simulation. I really liked it. I think I'd probably give it 4.5. I gave it 5 on Goodreads just because I was feeling generous that day, and you can't do halves. It's probably my favorite of her books, though it's been a really long time since I read Station 11, so I might change my mind if I read it again. I'm not sure. And I'm currently reading The Paris Apartment, Lucy Foley, I think. Somebody at work recommended it. I'm not really that into mysteries and that sort of suspenseful, I've forgotten the word, for those sorts of books, but it's fine for summer, and it's okay. I did just finish watching The Janes on HBO Max. It is a documentary about women in Chicago who ran an illegal abortion operation in the 60s and 70s. Um, it's really good and sort of gets you thinking about like what would I take a stand for, because they were literally felons, conspiracy to commit abortion and actually doing abortions was illegal and felonious, and some of them were arrested in the end. um, and so it makes you think about like, what is there something that, a law that feels so unjust or needs changing in such a fundamental way that I'd be willing to do something illegal in support of the people who are against that law. And I don't know. But it's interesting to think about, what cause could you support with your body in such a way, even if it's not to the level of like felony arrests, but, protesting in the streets or whatever that looks like for you. It's interesting to think about. And then I have no memory of the name of the thing that I started watching right after that, which is the sort of docu-series about the Remnant Baptist Church. Is it Baptist Church? I don't know. The church in Tennessee that's like a weight loss cult. It came out a while ago, but I'm just now getting around to watching it. So anyway, that's what's on my plate right now. And like I said, I'm knitting a cowl and watching a lot of baseball because the Arkansas Razorbacks have been in the College World Series, and they've, as I'm recording this, it's Thursday. They are about to play this afternoon. They're the last game that if they win, they get to go into the final series, and they fought back from a really terrible loss to be one game away from the finals, so that's pretty great. But it's been like a whole lot of baseball, a whole lot of knitting this week, which is great. So I would love to know what you were reading and watching and working on, and I hope that you will take the challenge of considering your craft making work of creativity as art and see how that feels and what that does for you. And I would love to hear all about it in the comments. And I hope that you have a good crafty weekend, whatever time you're watching this, and I will see you again soon.